Today I'm going to talk about using launch arguments and environment variables within scripting within FileWave in order to run things more securely, but there's also some tricks that actually are pretty helpful to evaluate things at runtime. And this will just be a couple of quick tips to help you out. So the first thing is our knowledge base, kb.filewave.com. If I go for script best practices, this article is very helpful to explain why you would want to do this. For instance, not using a password in a launch argument, and the reason why. It actually shows how the launch argument is seen as a process. Somebody on the machine who can see the running processes could be able to see a password that was passed through a launch argument, but they can't see things that are passed through environment variables. These are kind of the two ways that you can send something to a script when it runs. And I'm going to show you an example that uses both methods and the reason, kind of why I use the environment variable for the password. But you'll see in this article, if you do set up an environment variable on a Mac, you would see that would be represented by $mypass, right? Because that was that environment variable. I called it my_pass, and so it comes through in the script with a $. On Windows, it's important to know that it might be $env:\mypass if it was PowerShell, versus a batch file, which again is the traditional variable within percent signs, right? So it's just regular scripting things. The way that FileWave takes advantage of this is if I go to my administrator, and I have a good example. This is a file set that will actually reset a Windows device for the purposes of enrolling it through autopilot through our new MDM feature. So if I click on this file set and then I go to look at the scripts, because it's basically a file set that's just a script. Here's my script, and here, it's least obvious for how to get to the settings that I want. But you can right-click on the script and pick Properties, and now you can see the launch arguments and the environment variables. So this environment variable is a token used for the API. So I use the word token for it. And then this is the actual, think of it like a password. I don't want this in the clear. This is just a test environment with a dummy value, but I don't want this to be something where a user could discover it on their machine and then use the API to do damaging things to my server. I have launch arguments, and these are passed as parameters to the script. And here I'm using %device_ID, kind of passing it to the script as an argument. So these are things that'll be passed as parameters, and then the script could evaluate it. So let's take a look at my script and see the way that I used these two things. So if I go here and I pick to edit my script, you can see token equals $env:\token, right? So I assign it to a variable. And device, I'm using $args and then the 0 in the brackets. So in PowerShell, parameters passed to a script are going to be like args0, args1, args2, representing which argument that was passed to it. So I can, when I run a script, pass things, kind of in real time when the script is run, and environment variables can be set. So to some extent, they're interchangeable, but the really nice thing about environment variables is this token was passed as an environment variable. It's in memory. So if you could explore the system's memory, if you had the right permissions, in theory, you could see that token. But a regular user, not an administrator, would not be able to see that token in memory. So essentially, the token is protected. And you'd want to do this for any kind of script that might use a password that it passes. You definitely want to use environment variables. So this was an example in a file set, but you might do this also for custom fields. So I'm just going to go over to custom fields, and I'm going to pick this autopilot hash, which runs a script. Now I'm not using any of these in this particular script, but I want to show you that execution environment is right here. And I could create one or more launch arguments. So I could say, %device ID if I wanted, or some other launch argument. I could create, token, and then put some token value in. I could hit save, and then the script would be able to leverage that, remembering that environment variables are not seen by a user. Launch arguments are potentially seen by a user. So think about what you're trying to do, and if it's possible that a user might see some bit of information that they shouldn't, you can secure it with that. And you can do that, as far as I'm aware, everywhere that we do scripting. So here it's kind of obvious. This was a Windows example, but when you go to the macOS tab, the same thing is true. I can create launch arguments, pass them to the script. I can set environment variables. The other nice thing, forgetting about the fact that you might pass passwords through environment variables, I think of launch arguments as helpful for, let's say in my script, I have a few settings. It could run differently based on different criteria. So I might have some preferences that I set, right? And imagine that these are settings that the script gets every time it runs. And let's say that this 50 is to increment something by 50. And down the road, I decide, you know what, maybe that should really be 75. So I can tweak it here without ever really adjusting the script itself. The script can stay the same, and these values can be set kind of independently without messing with them. So I find that nice because then it's easy to share a script, and then give suggested settings, but somebody might have their own settings they do, and again, for the password scenario, you're gonna probably set it in environment variables. But that's good too, because then you can store your script somewhere that other people might see it and learn from it, but it won't have the environment variable set, so they won't have the password that you might have been using. So, and think about that too. If you're somebody who makes file sets or custom fields and shares them with other people, when you're exporting them, think about what environment variables and launch arguments you might have set, because you may want to go through and clean your script or your file set of that information that is unique to your environment so that someone doesn't get that. In my environment, I just have some labs. Nobody's really breaking into anything, but if I was back managing systems, I would be, very sensitive to cleaning my scripts, preparing them to be shared. So that's just something to think about. So, that's really it for this topic. There's the button here, and the thing that will probably be forgotten most often would be when you go to scripts and you want to get to the properties of the script. I find this is the easiest way. I right click and I pick properties. But otherwise, with that and the Knowledgebase article that I showed, remember the script best practices that has some tips about this. I think that you could start to use the ideas to make your scripts more secure. Because if you think about it, if your password was within the script, if someone got a copy of that script, if somebody was able to intercept it from the file system, then they would have your password too. And you don't want that. So even if you took the step to make it a launch argument, now it's not in the script, but it can be seen by somebody on the machine at the time it runs, put the password into an environment variable, and now it doesn't exist on disk. It only exists in memory, and memory is pretty well protected on Mac and Windows. And so, now you've taken steps to make sure that you can do something like authenticate to a service. You can have that within your script without really having it in your script. And it's a much safer, secure position to be in, because you never want somebody to, compromise some environment that you have and possibly cause harm. So that was the tip I wanted to share with you today. I hope this was helpful.